Probably, I could not get it to work. So the recipe in that is just R.I.P. sweet potato pralines. And I just, I wrote the whole story. Readers, I'm so sorry I tried. But if you want them, here's where I got them. So maybe you can order them by mail. I was literally dizzy from mixing sweet potatoes and sugar. I'd be taste testing and try to get the consistency right, and then tossed in the garbage.
That's funny.
Ellen, we thank you so much for being on the show. We so look forward to meeting you at Malice.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful opportunity. I'm so excited I get to meet you both.
Well, you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks so much.
Ellen.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.
And next we have up L.A. Chandlar. Enjoy. We are speaking today with Laurie Chandlar. She writes as L.A. Chandlar, and she has been nominated for an Agatha Award in the Best Historical Novel category for her book, The Gold Pawn, which is part of her Art Deco Mystery Series. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
For our listeners and for us, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born and raised in Michigan, in a suburb just outside of Detroit. I have a background in public relations and English literature, and I worked for a few years at General Motors, and then my husband and I quit our jobs and actually went on the road with his band for 5 years. Managed the rock band for about 5 years. We've traveled to 46 states and did a whole bunch of charity concerts with the military and prisons, as well as regular music venues. And then that ended up drawing us to New York City about 18 years ago. And we both have jobs here in the city, and we didn't know if we would love it or hate it. We'd never lived in a big city, and we moved not knowing if we'd love it. And we've been here 18 years. Haven't looked back.
That is some memories right there.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
What was your reaction when you found out you were nominated?
Oh my gosh. I literally cried almost immediately. You know, the industry is a fascinating industry. Easy to be filled with self-doubt, or you're always second guessing yourself, because that's just the nature of any entertainment industry where you're putting yourself out there. And I love people. So I loved going to Malice Domestic last year. It was my first time to go there. And so to get nominated, to be part of all that meant a lot, all those kinds of ways. But then also I adore the other authors in my category and have read pretty much everything they've ever written. And all of them have like 15 book plus in their resume. It was really an honor. And then the only one at home was my younger son, who's 13. He helped me open a bottle of champagne anyway, gave him a sip, and then I drank a lot of that. So it was really fun. It was a great night.
Well, what drew you to writing mysteries, and especially the Art Deco period? That's not one you see books written about a lot.
I've always loved mystery. I am a huge reader. I go through a lot of books a year. Mystery is my favorite, all different kinds, from more thrillers to every cozies. And I love the adventure of the puzzle. My favorite ones are where you love the characters like friends and you love the world that the author create. I love that. I've always been drawn to it. What got me writing it is I've written a lot of small things before that, like articles or talks, but I'd never written a full-length novel. But when we moved to New York, we moved here just 2 weeks after 9/11. We were actually flying here on 9/11 to sign our lease. And of course, that did not happen. But when we got here, just a couple weeks later, we saw a side to the city that was fascinating. And I'd learned so much about humanity during that time. But then I'd also started reading about the 1930s because there were a lot of different books that were coming out, just happened to be around that time. One of them was about Mayor Fiorillo LaGuardia. And they were actually comparing the time in the city after 9/11 to similar times that were in the 30s. And what made me totally write about it was I love him as a person. He's this dynamic firecracker who just fights for the little guy, and he's funny, and I love that. And then also, though, it made me realize that why I liked this Art Deco era, but specifically the 30s, was because I believe that time frame often gets very overshadowed by the Depression. So people just think of only the soup lines and the Dust Bowl and the books like The Grapes of Wrath, that kind of thing. But oh my gosh, there was so much going on outside of that. And I felt like that whole idea of beauty out of adversity was incredible at that time. And I think that's why Art Deco was just those 2 decades sandwiched between the 2 world wars. So it's a very short amount of time. It was such a potent time where women were in the workforce way more than I thought they were in prominent positions. The humor was outrageous and fun, and the innovation in art was extremely memorable. I want to write that story. I want to tell people about that side to the era because I think that's so powerful and fun. And I love that aspect about people.
That's a great answer. It's just fascinating. The style alone, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that definitely stood the test of time.
Definitely.
Yeah. And even for people who don't know art or they're not artsy, you say the words Art Deco and immediately things start coming to mind. There's just no other era that's like that you could say those two words that describe the era or the era's title. And a lot of times other people are like, oh, well, what's that? Unless they've had art history or so I found that very intriguing that it's so powerful and well known.
What advice would you give to aspiring mystery authors?
My top two pieces of information are never be afraid of what has worked for other people if it doesn't work for you. And that to find what does work for you, even if it's really small increments of time, but consistently. Because even if it's small but consistent, that kind of time adds up and your work compounds and it creates appetite to want to do more. It took me a long time to write the book, my first one, because I couldn't figure out how to do it. Life was busy. It was complicated. We were starting a family. We just moved to the city. We had no friends, no support system, and life is always complicated. I was having a hard time figuring it out. And I even had someone tell me, they're like, if you just do it for little bits at a time, you're never going to write your novel. What you need is a 10-week beach retreat. I'm like, are you out of your mind? That's never going to happen. Essentially, you're saying don't do it. And that wasn't good enough for me. I figured out what my time was, and I started with 2 hours a week. I needed a big enough chunk that I could actually concentrate. I had little tiny kids at the time. Also, babysitters are expensive in the city. I had no grandparent or mom to send them to. I couldn't break the bank, but it had to be just the right amount of time where I wasn't also tempted to go get my hair cut and also go to the doctor, like you do when you have little kids. I started with just 2 hours a week. I sat my butt down at the closest Starbucks I could find and just started writing. And it was so fun. And it did create appetite. I ended up finding more time just here or there because I started thinking about my characters more. And then your work really does compound. A couple of scenes turns into several chapters, turns into multiple chapters, and then one day you actually write the words "the end," and it's life-changing.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got published?
It took a long time. I found an agent relatively quickly, but then the process was a lot slower. Luckily, since my husband was in the music industry, he had always given me a lot of good advice about, again, any industry where you're putting yourself out there for critique, and all of those industries, whether it's art, dance, drama, writing, it's very subjective. And so you're not just looking for, is your work good? You're looking for an editor that it's the right time, they've got the right slot open, and you have to be willing to keep working and keep growing and learning. So for me, it was a long time. I found an agent pretty fast. It was probably over 5 years before we actually found the perfect publisher. I was determined, and I felt like I kept writing all that time too, which is actually another piece of advice for new writers. When you finish the first book, of course, keep reworking it and make it better. We can always grow and learn. I hope to be 99 years old and growing and learning still. Also move on. I knew I wanted to write a series. I love series. And I had all these questions I wanted answered. What happens to Lane? What happens to Finn? I remember I just started writing it after a few years of rejections, and none of them were bad rejections. It was just like small things or just not the right timing. Like none of them were don't quit your day job kind, that soul-sucking rejections. But my husband asked me, he's like, well, are you going to be one of those writers that just puts your work in the closet and, hey, you tried, you had a great time doing it, job well done, and close the door? Or, and before he could even say, or what, I was like, no. I'm like, I have to find out what happened. I'm writing because I want to write this story. You have your answer then as far as, do you keep trying? Do you keep going? Absolutely. I'll figure this out one way or another. So that was my story.
Well, we hear that on occasion it's, oh, well, I got published. Of course, most people, it takes time before they get published, but sometimes it's just a matter of timing.
Sure.
You're in the right place at the right time, or certain events take place that make your creative offering more palatable or what have you.
Sure.
Like, timing, they say, is everything.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard from other authors that have said they've submitted a book and it was rejected. And then a couple years later, the same people will say, we've been looking for this book.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we all build muscle. Like, I think, unfortunately, we always hear of what I call the lottery winners, where you have someone who's 21 and they wrote their first manuscript. And this literally happened to me, by the way, the week that I found an agent, which that's like your first huge hurdle to get over. And I was just elated. That was the first time that someone in the industry, a professional, actually liked my work. You feel so validated. Ran into somebody who I'd known this guy's sister in high school, but vaguely. I didn't even remember their name. I just kind of remembered a face. And we were talking about writing, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's so amazing that you found your agent. Congratulations. You know, I've written a book, and I wrote this about this, and it just fell into the right hands of somebody, and we got it published. This happened, and then we got a movie deal, and next week we're going to be on the Today Show."
Wow.
I was like, what? Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, talk about a sucker punch. I was like, and I was genuinely happy for him, but also a little seething. But I was like, good for him. My analogy, whenever I'm teaching people about writing, or I think a lot of writing efforts are like any entrepreneurial effort, right? We all build muscle, and we're climbing Mount Everest, and you are building your muscle one way or another. The lottery winners are often the ones that they found the perfect helicopter and they got airlifted to the top. And that's great. Good on them. They will build their muscle too. It just will be in different ways. And sometimes you needed to climb maybe because maybe you end up halfway to the top, realize that something about your book or or even you come up with another idea. That's the one that opens the door for you, but then your other one gets picked up later. So I feel like if you kind of have an idea of your building muscle along the way, to me, it's a better way to be courageous about it and not fear rejection so much.
Well, and it probably doesn't hurt that you're doing something you really enjoy too.
Exactly. Then that's the question you always go back to. There's so much you have to do as an author. There's marketing and there's just a million things. And I often am not sure what I should pick. There's so many balls in the air at once. How do I focus? And it can be very overwhelming. And I always go back to that. I always go back to, why am I writing this? For me, it's always two reasons. I love the story. I want to get it out there. I want people to know this fiery, funny gumption of the 30s, especially just epitomized by Mayor LaGuardia. Also, I love people. And there's nothing more bonding than talking to somebody who loves the same book you do. You can be a stranger in the subway. I can turn to somebody and be like, "Oh my gosh, I've read that book." "No way. Really? Do you like it?" I mean, it could be someone completely opposite to me, and we are just suddenly really good friends. And I love that aspect about writing.
That's true. That's happened so many times.
Definitely.
We know you're going to be at Malice Domestic, and we are looking forward to seeing you there in person. Do you have any other events or books coming out?
I do. In fact, I just did this event last night that if you happen to be in the New York City area or even traveling, I often have these events where I did an author night at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I do scenes at the Met that take place in my books. So I take people to those places and show them, and then we talk about 1930s themes, and I do a whole talk and discussion with them on a famous 1930 mural by Thomas Hart Benton. And it's a really interesting mural that you don't even have to be artsy to enjoy it. It's like, there's so much in there to see. And then on Fridays and Saturdays at the Met at night, it's open late, and there's live music in a wine bar. So we end up at the wine bar still talking about stuff, and there's live music, and I have gift bags for them. It's just the best event. I have another one coming up in May. I'm probably going to be at Killer Nashville this August. My third book actually comes out August 27th. It's part of this series, a follow-up to The Gold Pawn, and it's called The Pearl Dagger, and that releases August 27th. So I have a lot of stuff for that in the Midwest, Chicago, Indiana, and Michigan. And then I'll be all over Texas leading up to BoucherCon, the World Mystery Conference that'll be held in Dallas. So I'll be in Houston, Austin, and Dallas in October.
Wow, you got a lot going on.
I do. I thrive at those conferences. I love to encourage other readers and writers. And I feel like for me, that's money well spent. Other people, that's a hard thing to go to conferences. So maybe there's things then that you do really well that you could focus on. But for me, I really enjoy those conferences. And I feel like I become a better writer because I'm always learning from other authors, but I also get to feed into other authors' lives and encourage them. And of course, readers. I'm constantly reading myself. So I'm always getting ideas there's so many great books out there.
Now, your event at the Metropolitan, do you post those on your website?
I do. I'm on Instagram. I have my own website, Facebook, and Twitter. And so, yes, all of my events, whether they're at the Met or conferences or signings, I will always have on pretty much all of my social media. Everything is under the name L.A. Chandlar. You'll find it.
Great. We will update our show notes notes with that information. You can go on and check out everything by Lori L.A. Chandlar.
Great. It's so much fun.
One of my favorite things besides reading.
It just looks so different. So it's magical. It's just so much fun.
Well, that's great.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. Like I said, look so forward to meeting you at Malice.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it too. And it has been so much fun talking with you. I have really enjoyed your podcast. I've listened to several of the ones that you had about upcoming authors that were nominated at Malice too, and I really have enjoyed them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.